With his last dollar, he bought an Apache girl, but she taught him the true cost of love. Elias Turner had once believed that a man could build his life with his own 2 hands. He had believed in hard work, in sunrise mornings, in soil that answered effort with crops. Years ago, he had stood on a small piece of land and felt proud. It wasn't much, but it was his. He had a small wooden house, a few cattle, and dreams that felt bigger than the sky above him. But life on the frontier did not always reward effort. The rains stopped coming one year, then they stopped the next. The earth cracked open like old leather. Crops failed. Animals grew thin. Elias borrowed money to survive the first season, then borrowed more to survive the second. He told himself it was only temporary. Things would turn around. They didn't. On top of the drought came sickness. His wife, Clara, fell ill during the second winter of hardship. There were no proper doctors nearby, and medicine cost more than Elias could afford. He tried everything he could think of. He sat beside her bed at night and promised her that when spring came, everything would be better. Spring came, but Clara did not live to see it. After her passing, the house felt too large and too quiet. The wind through the broken fence sounded like whispers. Elias stopped talking much. He did what he had to do each day, but there was no hope behind it. When the bank finally claimed his land because of unpaid debt, he did not argue. He simply packed what little he had into a worn leather bag and walked away. From that day on, he became a drifting man. He moved from town to town, taking whatever work he could find. Fixing fences, carrying supplies, cleaning stables. Sometimes he worked for food instead of money. His boots grew thin. His coat faded under the sun. He spoke little and trusted less. He learned that when a man has nothing, most people look right through him. By the time he reached the trading post near the edge of Apache territory, he had only $1 left in his pocket. He felt it there as he walked, rubbing his thumb against the coin through the cloth. That dollar was meant to buy flour and beans to last him several days. He had already planned how carefully he would spend it. The trading post was noisy and restless. Soldiers stood near their horses. Traders argued over prices. The smell of dust and sweat filled the air. Elias stepped inside, hoping to buy food before nightfall. That was when he heard the low voices in the corner. At first, he paid no attention. He had learned not to get involved in other people's business. Trouble had a way of finding lonely men, but something in the tone of those voices made him pause. A few men stood near the back wall. Between them stood a young Apache girl. She was not chained, but she was surrounded. Her hands were at her sides. Her clothes were worn but clean. Her long, dark hair fell straight down her back. She did not cry. She did not shout. She stood still, her chin lifted slightly, her eyes steady. The men spoke about her as if she were a tool or a piece of land. One said she could work in the fields. Another said she could clean and cook. They argued about price in quiet, careless voices. Elias felt something twist inside him. He told himself it was not his concern. He had no home, no money to spare, no future to offer anyone. He was barely surviving himself. He turned toward the counter to buy his food. Then the girl's eyes met his. It lasted only a moment, but it felt longer. Her eyes were not pleading. They were not begging for rescue. They were calm, but there was pain beneath that calm. Not loud pain, quiet pain. The kind that comes from losing everything familiar. Elias looked away quickly, uncomfortable. He remembered Clara's eyes during her last days. Not fear, but quiet understanding, quiet strength. He swallowed hard and told himself to walk out. One of the men laughed softly and named a small price, as if the girl were nothing more than an unwanted animal. The other shrugged. No one seemed eager. She was young and thin. A burden more than a prize? Elias felt the coin in his pocket again. $1. His last dollar. If he spent it, he would have nothing. No food. No safety. No plan. He could walk away. No one would even remember he had been there. But he kept hearing those careless voices. Before he fully understood what he was doing, Elias turned around and stepped closer. "I'll give $1, he said quietly. The men looked at him and laughed at first. They saw his worn boots, his faded coat. He did not look like a man with power or purpose. "You?" one of them said. "What would you do with her?" Elias did not have an answer ready. He thought quickly. "I've got work lined up north," he replied. "Could use help. That's all." They'd expected more money, but no one else was offering anything. After a moment, one of them shrugged. "Fine. $1. Elias pulled the coin from his pocket. It felt heavier than it ever had before. He placed it into the man's hand. Just like that, the exchange was done. No ceremony, no kindness, just a simple trade that changed two lives. The men walked away, already forgetting the moment. The girl remained where she was, still silent. Elias felt strange. He had not thought this far ahead. He had acted on something he could not fully explain. He did not feel proud. He did not feel powerful. He felt uncertain. He looked at her, unsure what to say. "You got a name?" he asked softly. She did not answer at first. Then, in careful English, she said, "A pony." The words sounded gentle, but strong. He nodded. Elias. They stood there for a moment, two strangers bound by a single coin. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The sky turned shades of orange and red, stretching wide across the horizon. Elias knew he could not stay in the trading post. He had no room rented, no stable to sleep in. He adjusted the strap of his bag on his shoulder. "Come on," he said quietly. A pony did not move immediately. She studied him, as if trying to decide something important. Then she followed. They walked out of the trading post into the open land. The air was cooling fast as evening approached. Dust rose softly around their steps. Elias felt the weight of what he had done settle over him. He had no house to take her to, no proper plan, only an abandoned cabin he had once repaired for a rancher several miles north. It was small and barely standing, but it offered shelter. As they walked, he kept a respectful distance. He did not reach for her arm. He did not speak more than necessary. He told himself again that he had done this for practical reasons. She could help with work. Two people could survive better than one, but deep inside he knew that was not the full truth. Something about her steady eyes had reminded him that even in a world that takes and takes, a man can still choose what kind of person he will be. The road ahead was long and uncertain. Night was coming quickly. Elias had no food in his bag, no money left in his pocket, yet for the first time in many months he did not feel completely empty. Beside him walked a girl named a pony, quiet as the evening wind, carrying her own pain and her own strength, and though neither of them spoke another word before darkness fell, both understood that this was not simply the end of a trade. It was the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. The road north felt longer than Elias remembered. The sky grew darker with each step, and the cold evening wind brushed against their faces. Elias walked a few steps ahead, carrying his small leather bag over his shoulder. Behind him, a pony followed quietly. Her footsteps were light, almost soundless on the dry ground. Neither of them spoke much. Elias did not know what to say. He was not used to company anymore. For a long time, silence had been his only companion. Now, with someone walking behind him, he felt aware of every movement he made. He wondered if she was afraid. He wondered if she regretted not running when she had the chance. After an hour, he slowed his pace. "You tired?" he asked without turning around. There was a short pause before she answered. "No." Her voice was calm, but careful. She spoke as if every word needed to be chosen wisely. They continued walking until they reached the small cabin near midnight. It stood alone near a cluster of thin trees. The wood was old and weathered. One shutter hung slightly crooked. It was not much of a home, but it had a roof and four walls. Elias pushed the door open. The hinges made a soft creaking sound. Inside, the space was simple. One narrow bed rested against the wall. A small wooden table stood near the center of the room. In the corner was a stone fireplace. Dust covered most surfaces, but it was dry and safe from the wind. Elias stepped inside first and set his bag down. He struck a match and lit a small lantern hanging near the wall. Warm yellow light filled the cabin, pushing back the darkness. A pony stepped in slowly, her eyes moving carefully around the room. She did not show fear, but she stayed close to the door. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but it's dry." He walked to the bed and brushed the dust off with his sleeve. Then he stepped back. "You take the bed," he said. A pony looked at him confused. "I'll sleep there," he added, pointing toward the floor near the fireplace. For a moment she did not move. Perhaps she was waiting for him to change his mind. But he did not. You spread an old blanket on the wooden floor and sat down. He removed his boots and leaned back against the wall. The pony slowly walked to the bed. She sat at the edge, still alert, as if unsure whether this kindness would last. Elias blew out a slow breath. He felt tired deep in his bones. "We'll find work tomorrow," he said. "There's a ranch a few miles east. I fixed fences there once. Maybe they'll need help again." She did not respond, but she listened. After a while, the lantern light flickered softly. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, silence settled between them like an invisible wall. Elias closed his eyes, but sleep did not come quickly. His thoughts felt heavy. He wondered what she thought of him. Did she see him as just another man who had taken control of her life? Did she expect harsh words or strict orders in the morning? He turned slightly on the floor. "You hungry?" he asked quietly. There was a pause. Then she answered, "Little." "Tomorrow," he said. "I'll get food tomorrow." She lay down on the bed and turned toward the wall. The next morning came cold and pale. Sunlight slipped through the cracks in the wood. Elias woke early, stiff from sleeping on the floor. Derek, he was not alone. Then he heard soft movement. Aponi was already awake. She stood near the small window looking outside. Her face was calm, but her eyes seemed far away, as if her thoughts were somewhere beyond the hills. Elias stood up and brushed dust from his coat. "I'm going to the ranch," he said. You can stay here." She looked at him and shook her head slightly. "I come." He hesitated. "It's a long walk." "I come," she repeated more firmly. He nodded. "All right." They walked together under the morning sun. The land stretched wide around them. Birds flew overhead. The air felt cleaner than the night before. At the ranch, an older man named Mr. Collins stepped out of the barn when he saw Elias approaching. "Well, I'll be," Collins said. "Didn't expect to see you again." "Looking for work." Collins looked past him and noticed a pony. His expression changed slightly, but he did not ask questions. "Fence on the south side needs fixing," Collins said after a moment. "Can pay you small. Food, too." "That's enough," Elias replied. They spent the day working side by side. Elias repaired broken posts while Aponi gathered loose boards and carried tools without being asked. She moved with quiet focus, learning quickly by watching him. At midday, Collins's wife brought out bread and stew. Elias handed a bowl to Aponi first before taking one for himself. She hesitated before accepting it, then gave a small nod of thanks. They sat under a tree to eat. For the first time, there was something almost peaceful in the air. As days passed, a pattern formed. Each morning, they walked to the ranch. Each evening, they returned to the cabin. Elias earned small wages and brought back flour, beans, and sometimes dried meat. Inside the cabin, he tried to keep things simple. He never raised his voice. He never gave harsh orders. If something needed to be done, he asked instead of demanded. "Can you bring water from the stream?" he would say. Or, "We'll fix the roof tomorrow." Aponi spoke little, but she listened. Slowly, she began to do small things without being told. She swept the floor. She arranged the table neatly. She even placed wildflowers in a small jar near the window one evening. Elias noticed, but did not comment at first. One sunset, after a long day of work, he sat outside the cabin sharpening a tool. The sky turned soft shades of gold and pink. Aponi sat a few feet away, watching the horizon. Then she began to sing softly. The words were in her own language. Elias did not understand them, but the melody carried deep feeling. It was gentle and steady, like a river moving through stone. He stopped sharpening and listened. There was sadness in the song, but also strength. It did not sound like a cry for help. It sounded like remembrance. When she finished, silence returned. "What's it about?" he asked carefully. She thought for a moment, searching for English words. "Home," she said quietly. "Family. Sky. You miss them." "Yes." He looked down at his hands. "I miss mine too." She glanced at him surprised. "My wife," he added. She passed. Aponi studied his face as if trying to understand this new piece of him. "Sorry," she said softly. It was the first time she had shown open sympathy. That night, something changed. The air between them felt less heavy. Not fully comfortable, but lighter. Over the following weeks, they began to share small words more often. She taught him the meaning of her name. "Aponi means butterfly," she explained one evening. He smiled faintly. "Butterflies don't stay in one place long." She gave the smallest hint of a smile in return. Though they still moved carefully around each other, a quiet understanding was growing. Elias began to realize that she was not simply someone under his care. She had knowledge, strength, and dignity of her own. And Aponi began to see that Elias was not like the others she had encountered before. He was rough and quiet, but not cruel. There was sadness in him, but also kindness. They were still strangers in many ways. But under that small wooden roof, something new was forming. Not ownership, not control, but the slow and careful building of trust. and neither of them yet understood how much that trust would soon be tested. Winter did not arrive gently that year. It came early, carried by sharp winds that moved across the open land without mercy. The trees near the cabin lost their leaves quickly, and the air turned thin and biting. Each morning, frost covered the ground like a sheet of pale glass. Elias noticed the change in the weather before the first snow fell. He had lived long enough on the frontier to read the signs. The wind felt different. The animals grew restless. Even the sky looked harder, colder. One evening, as they walked back from the ranch, he glanced at the horizon and spoke quietly. "Snow's coming soon." A pony followed his gaze. She nodded once. "Yes, I feel." Over the next few days, they worked longer hours. Elias wanted to earn as much as possible before the heavy storms began. He repaired fences, stacked wood, and carried feed for the animals. A pony stayed close, helping where she could. She moved quickly despite the cold, her hands red from the icy air, but steady. Inside the cabin, Elias checked the roof carefully. He filled small cracks in the walls with cloth and mud to keep the wind from slipping through. He stacked firewood neatly by the fireplace. Supplies were limited, but he tried to prepare as best as he could. One afternoon, the first snow began to fall. It started lightly, soft white flakes drifting down without sound. A pony stepped outside the cabin and held out her hand. Snow gathered in her palm and melted quickly. She watched it quietly, her face calm. Elias stood in the doorway. "It's going to be a long season," he said. She looked back at him. "We ready?" He hoped she was right. As winter settled in, their world grew smaller. The path to the ranch became harder to travel. Snow covered the ground in thick layers. Some days the wind was so strong that stepping outside felt impossible. They spent more time inside the cabin. The fire burned almost constantly, its warm glow becoming the center of their small world. At first the quiet felt peaceful. Elias would repair tools at the table while a pony sorted dried beans or stitched small tears in clothing. The sound of the wind outside became part of the rhythm of their days. But winter tests more than patience. It tests strength. One morning, while chopping wood behind the cabin, Elias swung the axe with force against a frozen log. His hands were stiff from the cold. The blade struck at an awkward angle. His foot slipped slightly on the snow. He lost his balance. He fell hard against the ground, his leg twisting beneath him. A sharp pain shot through him, strong enough to steal his breath. The axe slipped from his hand. For a moment he lay there staring at the pale sky, unable to move. A pony heard the sound from inside. She rushed out immediately. When she saw him on the ground, she ran through the snow and knelt beside him. "Elias," she said, her voice steady but concerned. He tried to sit up, but pain rushed through his leg again. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his face tightened. She examined his leg carefully. Even through his worn pants, she could see swelling beginning near his ankle. "You not fine?" she said gently. With effort and her support, he managed to stand. Each step back to the cabin felt heavy. He leaned on her more than he wanted to admit. Inside, she guided him to sit near the fire. He hated the feeling of weakness. For years he had survived alone. Now, unable to even walk properly, he felt frustration rising in his chest. "It's nothing," he said again, though his voice lacked strength. A pony did not argue. She crouched near the fireplace and placed more wood on the flames. Then she stepped outside briefly, despite the cold. When she returned, she carried small branches and dried plants she had gathered earlier in the season. Elias watched her with confusion. "What are you doing?" he asked. She knelt beside him and gently rolled up the bottom of his pant leg. The swelling was worse now. She touched the area carefully, pressing lightly. He winced. She nodded slightly, as if confirming something in her mind. Then she began crushing the dried plants between two flat stones on the table, mixing them with a little warm water. "My grandmother teach," she explained quietly. "For pain, for swelling." He watched in silence as she applied the mixture to his injured ankle. Her movements were calm and careful. After wrapping the area with clean cloth, she sat back and studied her work. "You rest," she said firmly. The simple words surprised him. Over the next few days, Elias could barely stand without help. The snow outside grew heavier, covering the world in deep white silence. The path to the ranch disappeared entirely. For the first time in many years, he was not the one providing. A pony rose early each morning. She kept the fire alive. She rationed the food carefully, making sure it lasted. She brought in small bundles of wood from the stack Elias had prepared before the storm. When water from the nearby stream became harder to reach, she melted snow carefully inside a pot. Elias watched her quietly from his seat near the fire. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and shame. Days passed slowly. The pain in his leg remained strong at first, but gradually the swelling began to reduce. The herbs seemed to help. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Elias spoke softly. "You don't have to do all this." She looked at him, confused. "We both here," she replied. "We both live." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. He lowered his eyes. He had once thought of her as someone he had saved from a worse fate. Now he understood something different. She was not weak. She was capable, strong, resourceful. One night, as the storm outside grew louder, the cabin shook slightly under the force of the wind. The fire flickered wildly. Elias stared into the flames. "I thought I was helping you," he said quietly. Apache looked at him. "When I gave that $1, he continued, "I told myself I was doing something good. But maybe I just didn't want to feel alone." Apache sat across from him, her face lit softly by the firelight. She seemed to think carefully before speaking. "You not bad man?" she said slowly in her careful English. "Just lost." The word struck him deeply. Lost. No one had ever described him that way before. Not broken, not useless, not foolish. Lost. He looked up at her. "Lost," he repeated quietly. She nodded. "Like snow-covered path. You forget where go." He felt something shift inside his chest. For years he had believed the world had taken everything from him. He had seen himself as a victim of cruel seasons and hard luck. But now he realized something else. He had also closed himself off. He had stopped seeing people as more than obstacles or burdens. He had drifted without direction, without purpose. The snow outside covered the land, but it did not erase it. Beneath the white surface, the earth still existed. Maybe beneath his sorrow, something still existed too. As days turned into weeks, his legs slowly healed. He began to stand for short periods. Apache stayed close, ready to steady him if needed. Their conversations grew longer during those quiet winter evenings. He told her about his farm, about Clara's laugh, about the way the fields used to look at sunrise. She listened carefully, asking small questions when she could find the words. She shared memories of her family, of wide-open plains, of stories told around fires under the stars. Though her English was limited, her eyes carried meaning beyond language. The cabin no longer felt like a place of distance. It felt like a place of learning. Elias began to understand that strength did not always look like physical power. Sometimes it looked like patience, like quiet care, like standing firm even after losing everything. One afternoon, when the storm finally eased and sunlight broke through the clouds, Apache opened the door and stepped outside. Snow sparkled across the land like scattered glass. Elias stood carefully beside her, leaning slightly but steady. The world looked clean and new. "You see," she said softly, "storm pass." He nodded. "Yes," he replied, "it does." But inside him, another realization was forming. He had believed he had brought her into his life by choice. Now he understood something deeper. She had brought him back to himself. And though winter still held them in its cold grip, something warm and steady had begun to grow between them. Not ownership, not control, but understanding. When winter finally began to loosen its grip, it did not happen all at once. The snow did not disappear in a single day. Instead, it slowly softened under the growing warmth of the sun. The heavy white fields turned into wet earth again. Water from melting snow flowed in small streams along the edges of the land. The trees, which had stood silent and bare for months, began to show small green buds. Inside the cabin, the air felt different too. The fire was no longer needed all day. The door stayed open longer in the afternoons. Fresh wind moved through the room, carrying the scent of wet soil and new beginnings. Elias's leg had healed enough for him to walk without pain. He was not as strong as before, but he could work again. The first morning he stepped outside without leaning on the wall for balance. Apache watched him closely. "You walk good," she said with a small nod. "Because of you," he replied honestly. She did not answer, but there was quiet understanding in her eyes. With the path clear again, they returned to the ranch. Mr. Collins welcomed them back with mild surprise. The winter had been harsh for everyone, and extra hands were needed to repair damage left by storms. Life slowly returned to its routine. Long days of work, simple meals, quiet evenings. But something had changed between them. They no longer moved around each other like strangers forced into the same space. There was comfort now. They spoke more easily. Sometimes when Elias made a rare dry joke, a pony's lips would lift into a faint smile. It was small, but it meant something. One afternoon, as they walked back from the ranch, they noticed riders passing in the distance. 3 horses moved steadily across the horizon. Elias did not pay much attention at first. Travelers were common once spring returned. But a pony stopped walking. Her eyes followed the riders carefully. Her breathing changed slightly, almost too soft to notice. Elias saw the shift in her expression. "You know them?" he asked. She did not answer right away. The riders were too far to recognize clearly. After a moment, she shook her head. "No, not sure." They continued walking, but her silence felt heavier than usual. Over the next few days, more riders passed through the area. Some stopped briefly at the trading post several miles away. Word began to spread among workers at the ranch. An Apache group had been seen gathering south of the river, families reuniting after winter, camps forming again. Elias heard the talk while fixing a fence beside Collins. "They're settling near the old ridge," Collins said casually. "Heard there are dozens." Elias's hands froze for a second on the wooden post. He did not look up. "Is that so?" "Yeah. Probably best to keep clear," Collins added. Tensions still linger. Elias nodded but said nothing. That evening, as they walked home, he could feel something unspoken between them. The air felt heavier than usual, even though the sky was bright and clear. When they reached the cabin, a pony did not go inside immediately. She stood facing the southern hills, her figure still against the fading light. Elias stepped beside her. He did not ask how she knew. Sometimes a person simply feels when their people are near. "You want to see?" he asked. She did not respond, but her eyes did not leave the horizon. That night, neither of them slept easily. Elias lay awake on the floor, staring at the ceiling. He had known this moment might come one day. From the first evening he saw her at the trading post, he must have known this was not permanent. Yet knowing something and facing it are two different things. He had grown used to her presence, the quiet rhythm of 2 people sharing the same space. The small conversations, the sound of her soft singing at sunset. For the first time in years, the cabin had not felt empty. Now the thought of returning to silence weighed on him. In the morning, a pony was already awake when he opened his eyes. She had packed her few belongings neatly into a small cloth bundle. It was not much. She had never gathered many things. Elias sat up slowly. "You decided?" he said gently. She turned toward him. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried emotion she was trying to control. "My family there," she said. "Maybe. I must see." He nodded. He had no right to stop her. He stood and brushed dust from his coat. "We'll go today," he said. They did not speak much as they began the walk south. The land stretched wide before them, green beginning to replace white. Birds called from distant trees. The world felt alive again. But inside Elias, a quiet storm was moving. He remembered the first night in the cabin, the distance between them, the uncertainty. And now, after months of shared hardship, that distance had disappeared. He realized something difficult. He had once given $1 and believed he had taken responsibility. Now he understood that true responsibility meant something else. It meant choosing what was right, even when it hurt. After hours of walking, they reached a small rise overlooking a valley. In the distance, thin trails of smoke rose into the sky. Tents were visible between the trees. Horses grazed nearby. A pony stopped. Her breathing quickened. For a moment she did not move at all. Then she took a few steps forward, as if afraid the vision might disappear. Elias remained slightly behind her. "You go," he said softly. She turned to look at him. There were many things he wanted to say. Apologies. Gratitude. Words of respect. But none of them seemed big enough for the moment. "You free," he said instead. "You always were." Her eyes filled with quiet tears, but they did not fall. She stepped closer and placed her hand lightly over her heart. Then she pointed gently toward him. It was a simple gesture, but he understood. She would remember. Voices began to carry from the valley below. A few figures on horseback had noticed them. The riders slowed, watching carefully. A pony took another step forward, then paused again. She looked back at Elias one last time. In that look was everything they had shared. The cold winter nights, the firelight conversations, the pain, the healing. The lessons neither had expected to learn. No anger, no regret. Only understanding. Then she turned and began walking toward the valley. At first her steps were slow. then faster. One of the riders urged his horse forward. As he approached, there was a moment of stillness, then recognition. Even from a distance, Elias could see the change, arms reaching, voices calling out, the careful circle of people gathering around her. She did not look back again. The wind brushed against his coat. The valley below was filled with life and reunion. He felt something break inside him, but it was not the same kind of breaking he had known before. It was not loss born from helplessness. It was sacrifice born from choice. He could have turned away earlier. He could have convinced her to stay. He could have claimed that she owed him something. But she owed him nothing. Love, he was beginning to understand, was not about holding on tightly. It was about opening your hand. After a long time, he turned away from the valley and began the walk back toward the cabin. Each step felt heavier than the one before. When he reached the cabin near sunset, it felt different. Larger, quieter. The jar of wildflowers still sat near the window. Her small stitched cloth lay folded neatly on the table. He sat down slowly in the chair and stared at the empty bed. For a moment, loneliness returned like an old shadow, but this time, it did not feel the same. Because he knew something important now. He had not saved her. She had helped save him. And though the cabin was silent again, he was no longer lost in the same way. The path ahead might still be uncertain. But he knew who he wanted to be, and sometimes that is enough. He opened the door slowly, almost expecting to hear the soft sound of movement inside, but there was nothing. No gentle singing near the window, no quiet footsteps on the wooden floor, only the faint sound of wind brushing against the walls. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a long moment he simply stood there. The bed was neatly made. The small jar that once held wildflowers was still on the table, but the flowers had dried and bent toward the glass. The blanket she used during winter was folded carefully at the edge of the bed, just as she had left it. Elias sat down in the chair near the fireplace. He had known this day would come. He had walked her to the valley himself. He had watched her run toward her people. He had chosen to let her go. Yet knowing something in your mind is very different from feeling it in your chest. That night, he did not light the fire right away. The air inside the cabin grew cool as the sun disappeared beyond the hills. He sat in the dim light and thought about the months that had passed. He remembered the trading post, the careless voices, the $1 leaving his hand. At the time, he had believed he was making a decision out of impulse, maybe even out of loneliness. Now he understood something deeper. That dollar had not been a purchase. It had been a turning point. The next morning, Elias woke early. For a moment, he forgot again that he was alone. He almost spoke her name before stopping himself. He stood up slowly and stepped outside. Spring had fully arrived. The land no longer looked cold and empty. Grass moved gently in the breeze. The sky stretched wide and clear above him. He took a deep breath. There was work to do. He walked to the ranch that day with steady steps. Mr. Collins noticed immediately that a pony was not with him. She head back to her people? Collins asked. Elias nodded once. Yes. Collins studied him for a moment. You did right, he said quietly. Elias did not answer, but he felt a small weight lift inside him. Over the following weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Elias worked longer hours. With winter gone and his strength fully returned, he took on more responsibility. He repaired damaged barns. He trained new horses. He even helped a neighboring farmer rebuild a broken fence after a storm. People began to see him differently. Before, he had been just another drifting man looking for work. Quiet, distant, hard to read. Now there was something steady about him. He spoke with patience. He listened more carefully. When disagreements rose among workers, he did not step away. He helped settle them calmly. One afternoon, a young ranch hand lost his temper after making a mistake. He kicked a wooden bucket in frustration. Elias walked over and picked the bucket up. It's just wood, Elias said gently. Don't let small things control you. You never get angry? Elias thought for a moment. I used to, he admitted. But anger doesn't fix what's broken. He did not explain further. Sometimes, in the evenings, he would sit outside the cabin and watch the sun set. The colors in the sky reminded him of the first night he heard her sing. He could almost hear the melody again in the quiet wind. He did not feel bitterness. He felt gratitude. Summer brought warmth and long, bright days. The land thrived. Work was steady. Elias saved small amounts of money, not out of fear like before, but out of purpose. One afternoon, while delivering supplies near the southern ridge, he paused at the top of a hill. Below, far in the distance, he could see signs of movement. Tents set near trees, horses grazing, smoke rising into the sky. He did not go closer. He simply stood there. He did not know if Apache was still among them. He did not know what her life looked like now. But he hoped she was safe. He hoped she was surrounded by familiar voices and open skies. For a brief moment, he wondered if she ever thought about the small cabin near the trees. Then he smiled softly. It did not matter. Love, he had learned, was not about being remembered every day. It was about wishing someone well, even when their path no longer crossed yours. As the years moved forward, Elias slowly changed more than he realized. He no longer spoke carelessly about others. When conversations around him turned unkind toward different tribes or strangers passing through town, he would calmly say, "Every person has their own story." Some men rolled their eyes, others listened. But Elias did not argue loudly. He simply stood firm in what he believed. He knew what it meant to be misunderstood. He knew what it meant to be seen as something less than human. He had once looked at a pony and thought he was rescuing her. In truth, she had rescued him for becoming a smaller version of himself. One late autumn evening, nearly 3 years after that first winter, Elias returned to the cabin after a long day. The air was cool again, but not harsh. Leaves moved softly along the ground. As he approached the door, he noticed something unusual. Near the window, resting carefully on the wooden ledge, was a small object. He stepped closer. It was a simple bracelet made of woven thread and tiny beads. The pattern was delicate but strong. He picked it up gently. His hands trembled slightly. He had seen that style before. A pony had once shown him how her grandmother wove similar patterns, each design carrying quiet meaning. He looked around the trees, but no one was there. The land was still. There had been no knock, no voice calling out. Only this small gift. He understood immediately. She had come back, not to stay, not to return to the cabin, but to show something important. She was well. She remembered. Elias sat down on the step outside the cabin, the bracelet resting in his palm. He did not feel the sharp sadness he might have felt years ago. Instead, he felt peace. The true cost of love was not measured in money. It was not the $1 he had given at the trading post. It was not the months of shared hardship in the snow. The true cost of love was the willingness to let someone choose their own path. It was accepting that caring for someone sometimes means stepping aside. It was understanding that love is not control. It is not ownership. It is not holding someone in place because you fear being alone. Love is trust. Love is respect. Elias tied the bracelet gently around his wrist. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft gold and orange, he felt something settle deeply inside him. He was no longer the man who had wandered without direction. He was no longer lost. The land stretched wide before him, full of uncertainty and possibility. And though the cabin was quiet, it no longer felt empty. Because in learning to let go, he had gained something far greater than companionship. He had gained his humanity.